He always said I was just passing through the family, that I would never really be part of it, no matter how many years passed or how many sacrifices I made. "You're not blood of our blood," my stepson Michael used to repeat whenever I tried to participate in family decisions or when I offered help with the business. Well, today, as I sip my morning coffee in the office that now bears my name on the door, I can say with complete certainty that some people simply don't know how to recognize who really matters in their lives. And when they find out, it's too late. If you're here to listen to a story about delayed justice and well-deserved recognition, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Because this story will show you how sometimes life has a very particular way of putting everyone in their rightful place. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 52 years old, and I'm the CEO of Henderson and Associates, a business consulting firm that my late husband Richard founded 25 years ago. But this position didn't come by chance, and it definitely didn't come without a fight that lasted almost 2 decades. A fight that began the day I married Richard, when his son Michael, then 16 years old, looked me in the eyes during the ceremony and whispered low enough for only me to hear, "Enjoy it while you can. You'll never really be part of this family." Back then, I was a 33-year-old accountant working at a mid-sized firm in Boston. I met Richard when he hired my company for an audit. He was a widower of 3 years, a single father to a rebellious teenager, and was clearly struggling to balance his growing business with his parental responsibilities. We fell in love slowly, like 2 tired adults who finally found someone who understood their daily battles. Richard was 12 years older than me, a gentleman of Irish descent who had built his company from scratch after spending years working for other people. His first wife, Linda, had died of cancer when Michael was 13, and it was clear that the boy had never fully processed that loss. Instead, he had channeled all his pain into rage directed specifically at any woman who tried to occupy what he considered his mother's sacred place. The first years of our marriage were trench warfare. Michael, who had inherited his father's piercing blue eyes and Irish stubbornness, made a point of constantly reminding me that I was an intruder. When I cooked dinner, he would comment that my mother made it better. When I tried to help him with homework, he would say he didn't need help from a stranger. When Richard and I went out to dinner, Michael always managed to create an emergency that required his father's immediate presence. I remember one particularly painful Thanksgiving in 2006, our second year of marriage. I had spent 3 days preparing a traditional meal, wanting to create new memories while honoring Linda's traditions. I had even used her china, thinking it would show respect for her memory. But when Michael saw the table set with his mother's dishes, his reaction was swift and brutal. "Those are my mother's plates," he said coldly, standing in the dining room doorway. "She's the only one who should be using them." Richard tried to mediate, explaining that I was trying to honor Linda's memory, but Michael was beyond reason. He swept into the room and began removing the plates, handling them with exaggerated care, as if I had contaminated them somehow. The meal was eaten on everyday dishes, and the tension was so thick that even Richard's attempts at conversation fell flat. After dinner, as I was cleaning up, I found Michael in the kitchen, washing his mother's china with meticulous attention. "She used to wash these by hand every Thanksgiving," he said without looking at me. "She said they were too precious for the dishwasher. She said they would be passed down to her grandchildren someday." For a moment, I saw past his hostility to the grieving boy underneath. "Michael," I said gently, "I would never want to take your mother's place. I just want to find my own place in this family." He looked at me then, and his eyes were filled with a pain so deep it took my breath away. But when he spoke, his voice was cold again. "There is no place for you in this family. There's Dad, and there's me, and there's Mom's memory. That's it. You're just temporary." The most painful part was that Richard, no matter how much he loved me, always gave in to his son's manipulations. "He's going through a difficult phase," my husband would say, running his hand through his graying hair in a gesture I would learn to recognize as his sign of discomfort. "He lost his mother too young. He needs time to adjust." But years passed and Michael didn't adjust. If anything, he became more sophisticated in his methods of excluding me. When he turned 18 and went to college, I thought we would finally have peace. I was wrong. He would come home for holidays loaded with stories about how difficult it was to have a substitute stepmother and how he missed the good times when it was just him and his father. Michael's college years were marked by a pattern of deliberate exclusion that became more refined with time. He would call Richard during our date nights, claiming he needed advice about classes or career decisions. He would schedule visits home during weekends when I had planned romantic getaways for Richard and me. Most cruelly, he began creating traditions that specifically excluded me: father-son golf tournaments, camping trips to places Linda had loved, business discussions that he insisted should remain between Henderson men. I'll never forget the weekend in 2008 when Richard surprised me with tickets to see Les Miserables in New York for our anniversary. We had planned to make it a 3-day romantic weekend, something we rarely got to do because of Richard's demanding schedule. But the morning we were supposed to leave, Michael called in tears. He had been suspended from college for cheating on an exam, and he needed his father to come to campus immediately to meet with the dean. "Can't it wait until Monday?" I asked Richard as he paced our bedroom, clearly torn between his commitments. "We've been planning this trip for months." "He's really upset, Margaret," Richard said, already reaching for his suitcase. "He made a mistake, and he needs his father. The meeting is tomorrow morning. We could still go to New York afterward." But of course, one crisis led to another. The meeting with the dean became meetings with professors, then emotional conversations with Michael about his struggles with depression and his need for family support during this difficult time. By Sunday evening, when we finally returned home, our anniversary weekend had become another sacrifice on the altar of Michael's needs. Later, I discovered that Michael hadn't been suspended at all. He had received a warning for a late assignment, and the dean's meeting was a routine academic counseling session that students could schedule voluntarily. He had orchestrated the entire crisis to ruin our anniversary, and he had succeeded. What Michael didn't expect was that I wouldn't give up easily. While he was in college studying business administration, I was at home learning everything about my husband's company. Richard worked late every night, and I started staying at the office with him, initially just to spend more time together. But I soon discovered I had a natural talent for organizing the chaotic systems he had developed over the years. Richard's approach to business was intuitive, but disorganized. He kept client files in a combination of filing cabinets, computer folders, and handwritten notes that only made sense to him. His accounting system was a patchwork of different software programs that didn't communicate with each other. His scheduling was done on paper calendars that frequently conflicted with his digital appointments. It was a miracle the business functioned at all. I started small, volunteering to organize his filing system during the evenings when we worked late together. I color-coded client files by industry and service type, created standardized intake forms, and established protocols for document retention. Within a month, Richard could find any client information in under 30 seconds instead of the 10 or 15 minutes it had previously taken. "You have an impressive analytical mind," Richard told me one night as we reviewed the third-quarter financial reports. "You can see patterns I don't even notice." It was 2008, and the company was beginning to feel the effects of the financial crisis. Several corporate clients had canceled contracts, and cash flow was becoming a serious concern. The economic downturn revealed just how precarious Richard's business model really was. He had built the company on personal relationships and reputation, which were valuable but not sustainable during a recession when companies were cutting costs across the board. Many of his clients were small to medium-sized businesses that were struggling to survive, and they simply couldn't afford consulting services when they were laying off employees. I spent the next 6 months conducting a comprehensive analysis of every aspect of the business. I reviewed 5 years of financial records, analyzed client profitability, studied industry trends, and identified opportunities for diversification. What I found was both alarming and encouraging. The company was more vulnerable than Richard realized, but it also had more potential than he had ever explored. My analysis revealed that 60% of the company's revenue came from just 5 clients, making it extremely vulnerable to any single client's decision to reduce or eliminate consulting services. The company's service offerings were also too narrow, focusing primarily on traditional management consulting when the market was moving towards specialized expertise in areas like technology integration, crisis management, and regulatory compliance. But the company also had significant assets that Richard had never fully leveraged. A reputation for ethical practices, a team of experienced consultants with diverse industry backgrounds, and a client base that included several companies in recession-proof industries like healthcare and utilities. With the right strategy, Henderson and Associates could not only survive the economic downturn, but emerge stronger. I developed a comprehensive restructuring plan that addressed both the immediate crisis and long-term growth opportunities. The plan included cost reduction measures that would maintain service quality while reducing overhead, client diversification strategies that would reduce dependence on any single revenue source, and new service offerings that would position the company as a leader in emerging market niches. The cost reduction part was the most challenging because it required Richard to make difficult decisions about staffing and operations. We identified redundancies in administrative functions, renegotiated vendor contracts, and consolidated office space. But we also invested in technology upgrades that would improve efficiency and client communication, and we restructured consultant compensation to reward performance and client retention. The client diversification strategy involved a systematic analysis of our existing relationships to identify opportunities for expanded services, combined with targeted outreach to potential clients in stable industries. I developed detailed profiles of ideal clients based on our most successful relationships, then created marketing materials and presentations specifically designed to appeal to those prospects. The new service offerings were based on my analysis of market trends and client needs that weren't being met by our competitors. I identified 3 areas where we could differentiate ourselves: crisis management consulting for companies facing financial or operational emergencies, regulatory compliance consulting for heavily regulated industries, and technology integration consulting for traditional businesses trying to modernize their operations. Implementing this plan required working 18-hour days for months, but by the end of 2008, the results spoke for themselves. The company had not only survived the recession, but actually increased revenue by 15%. We had added 12 new clients, expanded our service offerings to include 3 specialized practice areas, and built a more efficient operational infrastructure that could support future growth. "I don't know what I would do without you," Richard said one December evening as we looked at the year-end numbers. "You've saved this business, Margaret. You've saved everything I've worked for." That Christmas, when Michael came home from college, he found a very different dynamic. For the first time, Richard openly credited me with the company's success. "Your stepmother has been incredible," he told Michael over Christmas dinner. "She's got a business mind that puts mine to shame. I'm thinking of making her a partner." I watched Michael's face carefully as his father spoke. The young man was 21 then, tall and lean like Richard, with the same determined jawline. But there was something cold in his eyes as he processed this information. "A partner?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "In the family business?" "It's not really a family business yet," Richard replied with a laugh. "But maybe it could be if you're interested in joining us after graduation." Michael smiled then, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course I'm interested, Dad. It's our legacy, after all. Ours." The emphasis on that last word wasn't lost on me. Michael was drawing battle lines, and he was making it clear that in his mind there was no us that included me. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Michael's sense of entitlement and his complete misunderstanding of what had actually happened during his absence. He questioned why I had been given so much authority over business decisions, suggesting that Richard was too generous and that family assets should be protected from outside influence. "Margaret isn't outside influence," Richard said firmly. "She's my wife, and she's the reason this company is still profitable. Everything she's done has been to protect and strengthen what we've built." But Michael wasn't listening to logic. In his mind, any success I achieved was somehow stolen from him. Any authority I gained was a threat to his inheritance. He spent the rest of his winter break subtly undermining my contributions, suggesting that the company's improved performance was due to market recovery rather than strategic planning, and implying that my partnership would complicate the business's future when he graduated and joined the firm. Over the next year, as Michael completed his senior year at Boston University, I continued to prove my value to the company. The strategies I had implemented during the recession positioned us perfectly for the economic recovery that began in 2009. While our competitors were still struggling to rebuild their client bases, we were expanding into new markets and adding experienced consultants who had been laid off by larger firms. I negotiated 3 major contracts that brought in more revenue than the company had seen in its entire first decade. The first was with Meridian Healthcare, a regional hospital system that needed help navigating new federal regulations while reducing costs. The project required expertise in healthcare operations, regulatory compliance, and financial restructuring, exactly the kind of specialized, high-value consulting that I had identified as a growth opportunity. The Meridian project was a perfect example of how my analytical approach to business development differed from Richard's relationship-based model. Richard would have focused on maintaining personal connections with hospital administrators and hoping they would think of him when they needed consulting help. I identified their specific challenges, developed targeted solutions, and presented a comprehensive proposal that addressed their needs in ways they hadn't even realized were possible. The project was so successful that Meridian not only renewed their contract for a second year, but also referred us to 3 other healthcare systems in different states. Within 18 months, healthcare consulting had become 25% of our revenue, and we had established ourselves as specialists in an industry that was experiencing rapid growth and regulatory change. The second major contract was with Pinnacle Manufacturing, a mid-sized company that was struggling to compete with overseas production while maintaining quality standards. This project required me to learn about supply chain management, international trade regulations, and manufacturing efficiency, areas where Richard had no experience and limited interest. I spent weeks studying Pinnacle's operations, interviewing their production managers, and analyzing their cost structures. What I discovered was that their problems weren't primarily about labor costs or overseas competition. They were about inefficient processes, outdated technology, and poor supplier relationships. The solutions required significant upfront investment, but they would position Pinnacle as a premium manufacturer that could compete on quality and customer service rather than just price. The transformation took 2 years, but the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Pinnacle not only avoided layoffs, but actually hired additional workers as their improved efficiency allowed them to take on more complex, higher-margin projects. The success story attracted attention from industry publications and led to consulting contracts with 5 other manufacturing companies. The third major contract was with Summit Financial, a regional bank that was facing increased scrutiny from federal regulators following the 2008 financial crisis. This project required expertise in banking regulations, risk management, and corporate governance, areas that were becoming increasingly important as the regulatory environment tightened. The Summit project was particularly challenging because it required balancing the bank's need to maintain profitability with regulators' demands for increased oversight and risk reduction. I had to learn federal banking law, understand complex financial instruments, and develop compliance protocols that would satisfy regulators without crippling the bank's ability to serve customers. The project took nearly 2 years and required me to work closely with federal banking examiners, something that few consulting firms had experience with at the time. But the result was a comprehensive compliance program that became a model for other regional banks facing similar challenges. Summit not only avoided regulatory sanctions, but actually improved their examination ratings and expanded their lending capacity. By the time Michael graduated in 2010, Henderson and Associates had tripled in size, and I had been officially named partner, with my name added to the company letterhead, Henderson and Chen Associates. Richard insisted on the change despite my protests that it wasn't necessary. "It is necessary," he said firmly as we stood in the lobby looking at the new sign. "You've earned this, Margaret. You've earned your place here, and everyone needs to know it." The new letterhead was more than just recognition. It was a statement about the company's evolution from a one-man operation to a professional services firm with multiple areas of expertise. It also represented a fundamental shift in how the business was positioned in the marketplace. We were no longer just Richard Henderson's consulting company. We were a partnership with complementary strengths and shared leadership. Michael's reaction to the name change was swift and harsh. He called Richard that evening, and I could hear his raised voice through the phone, even though I was sitting across the room. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, with Michael alternating between anger, pleading, and threats. When Richard hung up, his face was pale and drawn. "He's upset about the partnership," Richard said quietly. "He thinks I'm giving away his inheritance." "This doesn't change anything about his future with the company," I replied, though even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. My partnership meant that Michael would never have the complete control over the business that he had always assumed would be his birthright. "I know that, and you know that," Richard said, "but Michael sees things differently. He's always been possessive about what he considers his." That possessiveness became even more apparent when Michael officially joined the company in the fall of 2010. Richard created a position for him as Junior Business Development Associate, hoping that starting from the ground up would give his son a real understanding of how the business worked. Michael had other ideas. From his first day, Michael made it clear that he saw himself as the heir apparent and me as a temporary obstacle. He would contradict my suggestions in meetings, often proposing alternative strategies that were less effective, but that would give him more control. He started scheduling father-son lunches where business was discussed, but I was specifically excluded. Most insidiously, he began cultivating relationships with our longest-standing clients, subtly positioning himself as the real Henderson representative, while implying that my role was primarily administrative. Michael's approach to client relationships was fundamentally different from both Richard's and mine. Richard built relationships through personal warmth, shared experiences, and genuine interest in his client's success. I built relationships through expertise, reliability, and results that exceeded expectations. Michael tried to build relationships through entitlement and family legacy, expecting clients to defer to him because of his name rather than his contributions. The contrast became apparent during his first major client presentation. I had spent weeks preparing a comprehensive analysis of Bradley Industries' operational challenges, including detailed recommendations for improving their supply chain efficiency. Michael was supposed to assist with the presentation, but instead, he spent most of the meeting talking about the Henderson family commitment to client success and the generational knowledge that he brought to the relationship. The client, Tom Bradley, was polite but clearly unimpressed. After the meeting, he pulled me aside and asked directly, "Is he going to be taking over your role in this project? Because honestly, I'm more interested in your analytical approach than his family stories." I assured Tom that I would remain his primary contact, but the incident highlighted a fundamental problem with Michael's approach to the business. He assumed that clients would value his heritage over his competence, that his last name would open doors that his skills couldn't. In an industry where results mattered more than relationships, this was a dangerous miscalculation. "He's trying to undermine you," Richard's longtime assistant Sarah told me one afternoon. Sarah had been with the company for 8 years and had watched the family dynamics evolve. "He asks me questions about your schedule, your client calls, your access to the financial records. It's like he's gathering intelligence." Sarah was right. Michael was conducting a subtle campaign to position himself as the natural successor to his father's authority while marginalizing my influence. He would schedule meetings with Richard during times when I was unavailable, then make decisions about client strategies or resource allocation without consulting me. He would volunteer for high-profile projects, then claim credit for successes that were actually the result of groundwork I had laid months earlier. The most troubling aspect of Michael's behavior was his willingness to sacrifice client relationships for personal advancement. During a project with Coastal Logistics, a shipping company that was struggling with regulatory compliance, Michael made promises about delivery timelines that were impossible to meet given the scope of work required. When I tried to explain that his timeline was unrealistic, he accused me of being overly cautious and suggested that I didn't understand the client's urgency. The project became a disaster. We missed every major deadline, delivered work that didn't meet the promised specifications, and ultimately had to refund 30% of our fee to maintain the relationship. Coastal Logistics terminated their contract early and hired a competitor to complete the work we couldn't finish. It was the first major client loss in 3 years, and it was entirely preventable. This is what happens when you don't trust family members to handle important relationships, Michael said during the post-project review meeting, somehow managing to blame me for the failure that resulted from his overpromising and poor planning. Richard looked uncomfortable, but didn't directly contradict his son. However, I noticed that he assigned Michael to smaller, less critical projects after that, and he began requiring my approval for any commitments Michael made to clients. The situation came to a head in the spring of 2011 during our annual client appreciation dinner. It was a black-tie event held at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, and all our major clients attended along with their spouses. I had spent weeks planning every detail, from the menu to the entertainment to the seating arrangements. It was the kind of event that showcased not just our success, but our attention to relationship building, which was crucial in the consulting business. The evening was going perfectly until Michael's toast. I had expected him to make brief remarks about the company's gratitude for our clients' continued trust, but instead, he launched into a 15-minute speech about family values and generational commitment and the importance of maintaining the Henderson legacy. When my father started this company 25 years ago, Michael said, holding his champagne glass high, he had a vision of building something that would last for generations, something that would reflect the values he learned from his father and that he could pass down to his children. The speech was carefully crafted to emphasize family continuity while subtly questioning my permanence in the organization. Michael talked about blood commitment and inherited responsibility and the sacred trust between family businesses and their clients. Then, looking directly at our most important client, Robert Thornton from Thornton Industries, he delivered his coup de grace. Of course, as the family business grows, we want to ensure that the Henderson name and values continue to guide our decisions for generations to come. That's the Henderson promise, that your relationship isn't just with a company, but with a family that has a permanent stake in your success. The implication was clear to everyone in the room. I was not family, I was not permanent, and therefore my partnership was not representative of the company's true direction. Several clients later approached me with carefully worded questions about leadership continuity and long-term stability. Robert Thornton was more direct. "Margaret," he said during the cocktail hour after dinner, "I hope you know how much we value your work with our company. You've been instrumental in helping us navigate some very challenging situations. I just want to make sure that our relationship with you will continue to be the priority it has been." The fact that a client felt the need to seek that reassurance told me everything I needed to know about the effectiveness of Michael's strategy. He was using public forums to undermine confidence in my authority, and it was working. I spent that night lying awake, furious and hurt, while Richard slept peacefully beside me. For the first time since we'd married, I seriously considered whether Michael might be right. Maybe I was just passing through. Maybe I would never truly belong, no matter what I accomplished or how much I contributed. But by morning, my perspective had shifted. I realized that Michael's behavior wasn't just about protecting his inheritance, it was about power, control, and his inability to accept that his father had built something bigger than just a platform for Michael's ego. If Michael wanted to play politics, I would play too, but I would play to win. Over the next 2 years, I quietly began building my own power base within the company. I developed exclusive relationships with several key clients who valued my strategic insights and results-driven approach. I recruited talented consultants who were loyal to me personally, not just to the Henderson name. Most importantly, I documented everything. Every successful project I led, every revenue stream I generated, every problem I solved that Richard and Michael couldn't handle on their own. The documentation process was meticulous and strategic. I created detailed case studies of every major project, including client testimonials, financial impact assessments, and before and after comparisons that clearly demonstrated the value I had added. I maintained records of all client communications, showing how my expertise had solved problems and prevented crises. I tracked revenue attribution, proving that 60% of the company's income was directly tied to relationships I had built or strategies I had implemented. I also began cultivating relationships with industry leaders, speaking at conferences, and publishing articles in trade publications. This wasn't just about professional development, it was about establishing my reputation independently of the Henderson name. If Michael wanted to challenge my legitimacy within the company, I would make sure that the broader industry recognized my expertise and contributions. The strategy paid off in ways I hadn't expected. In 2012, I was invited to join the board of the National Association of Management Consultants, a prestigious position that typically went to senior partners at major firms. I was asked to speak at the annual conference of the American Society for Quality, where my presentation on crisis management consulting was attended by over 500 industry professionals. Most significantly, I was profiled in Consulting magazine as one of 20 rising stars in management consulting, an honor that brought national attention to both me and Henderson and Chen Associates. By 2013, I had become indispensable in ways that went far beyond what anyone, including Richard, fully understood. I controlled the relationships with 60% of our client base. I had designed and implemented the systems that kept the company running efficiently. I had the respect and loyalty of most of our staff. Michael, meanwhile, had proven himself to be competent but not exceptional, good at maintaining existing relationships but poor at generating new business or innovative solutions. Richard began to notice the difference. "Margaret handles our most challenging clients," he told a potential investor during a meeting I attended. "She has a gift for understanding what they need before they know it themselves. I honestly don't know how we managed before she joined us." The investor meeting was particularly revealing because it showed how completely Richard's perception of the business had evolved. When he talked about the company's competitive advantages, he focused on our specialized expertise, our systematic approach to problem solving, and our track record of delivering measurable results, all capabilities that I had developed. When he discussed future growth opportunities, he referenced expansion plans that I had researched and proposed. When he addressed potential risks, he outlined mitigation strategies that I had implemented. Michael attended that meeting as well, and I could see his growing frustration as his father credited me with increasingly significant contributions to the company's success. During the break, I overheard Michael on a phone call in the hallway, complaining to someone about how his father was giving Margaret too much credit and how the investor was getting the wrong impression about who really runs the company. Michael's response to his father's praise was to double down on his exclusionary tactics. He started holding strategy sessions that included Richard but not me. He proposed restructuring the company in ways that would diminish my role while expanding his own. He even suggested that my partnership should be re-evaluated to ensure that it was aligned with the company's long-term vision. The strategy sessions were particularly problematic because Michael would use them to propose changes to projects I was managing, often without understanding the client requirements or technical constraints involved. Richard would sometimes agree to these changes in principle, then I would have to explain why they weren't feasible or would compromise our deliverables. This created confusion among staff and occasionally led to miscommunications with clients. One particularly egregious example involved our work with Atlantic Energy, a utility company that was implementing new grid management technology. Michael attended one of the strategy sessions and proposed that we accelerate the implementation timeline by 3 months to demonstrate our efficiency and exceed client expectations. He didn't understand that the timeline was dictated by equipment delivery schedules and regulatory approval processes that were completely outside our control. Richard initially supported the proposal, excited by the prospect of impressing an important client. I had to schedule a separate meeting to explain why accelerating the timeline was impossible and would actually damage our relationship with Atlantic Energy by creating unrealistic expectations. The incident highlighted how Michael's lack of operational knowledge could undermine projects that required precise coordination and realistic planning. "What long-term vision is that?" I asked during one particularly tense family dinner in the fall of 2013. "The vision where you inherit control of a successful business that you didn't build and that you don't fully understand." Michael's face flushed red. "I understand this business perfectly. It's my family's business, my legacy." "No, Michael," I said calmly, setting down my fork. "It's your father's business. And your father chose to make me his partner because I've earned it. If you have a problem with that, take it up with him." Richard looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict me. That silence spoke volumes about where his loyalties lay, at least professionally. But I knew that emotionally, the situation was tearing him apart. He loved his son, but he couldn't ignore the reality of what I had contributed to his life's work. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of family drama and unexpected justice. Because trust me, we're just getting to the good part. The tension continued to escalate throughout 2014. Michael became increasingly bold in his attempts to position himself as the rightful heir to the company, while I focused on continuing to deliver exceptional results for our clients. I knew that ultimately, results would matter more than rhetoric, but I also understood that Michael's campaign was beginning to create uncertainty among both staff and clients about the company's future direction. The staff situation was particularly delicate because Michael was trying to build alliances with long-term employees who had worked with Richard since the early days of the company. He would take these employees to lunch individually, ostensibly to get their perspective on business operations, but really to gauge their loyalty and plant seeds of doubt about my leadership capabilities. Sarah kept me informed about these conversations because several employees came to her with concerns about what Michael was trying to accomplish. "He's asking people whether they think the company has gotten too corporate since you became partner," Sarah told me one afternoon. "He's suggesting that we've lost the family atmosphere that made this place special." The irony was that the company had never been more successful or offered better benefits and working conditions than it did under my partnership with Richard. We had implemented professional development programs, improved healthcare benefits, and created performance-based bonus systems that rewarded excellence. Employee satisfaction surveys showed higher scores than we had ever achieved, and turnover was at an all-time low. But Michael wasn't interested in objective measures of workplace quality. He was appealing to nostalgia and emotion, suggesting that change was inherently bad, and that my contributions represented a departure from the company's authentic culture. It was a sophisticated form of manipulation that played on people's natural resistance to change and their loyalty to Richard. The breaking point came in December, during the company's annual review process. Michael had prepared a presentation for the staff that outlined his vision for the future of Henderson and Associates. The presentation included organizational charts that showed him as CEO, with various department heads reporting directly to him. My role was listed as senior consultant, essentially a demotion from partner to employee. The presentation was professionally designed and carefully written, but it contained several fundamental misunderstandings about how the business actually operated. Michael's organizational chart eliminated the specialized practice areas that I had developed, consolidating all client services under a single consulting division. This would have destroyed the expertise-based structure that allowed us to charge premium fees for specialized knowledge. His financial projections were also unrealistic, based on assumptions about growth rates and profit margins that ignored market realities and competitive pressures. Most tellingly, his timeline for implementation assumed that major clients would seamlessly transition to new account management structures, when in fact many of our clients had specifically requested to work with me and would likely terminate their contracts if I were marginalized. "This is presumptuous even for you," I told him after reviewing the slides. We were alone in the conference room, and Michael had that familiar cold smile on his face. "It's realistic," he replied. "Dad won't be running this company forever. Someone needs to step up and take leadership. Someone with the Henderson name and Henderson blood." "Someone like you?" I asked. "Someone who has never brought in a major client, never developed a new service line, never solved a crisis that threatened the company's survival?" Michael leaned back in his chair, still smiling. "I don't need to prove myself the way you do, Margaret. This is my birthright. You're just passing through." There it was again, that phrase that had haunted me for over a decade. "You're just passing through," as if my contributions, my partnership, my marriage to his father were all temporary inconveniences that would eventually be resolved in his favor. "We'll see about that," I said quietly, gathering up the presentation slides. "We'll see who's really just passing through." That evening, I showed Richard the presentation. I watched his face carefully as he flipped through the slides, seeing his son's presumption laid out in corporate flowcharts and bullet points. When he finished, he was quiet for a long time. "He's getting ahead of himself," Richard finally said. "This isn't how succession planning works." "Richard," I said gently, "this isn't about succession planning. This is about Michael's belief that he's entitled to everything you've built, regardless of merit or contribution. He sees me as an obstacle to be removed, not as a partner who has helped build this company's success." Richard nodded slowly. "I know. I've known for a while that this was coming to a head. I just hoped—" He trailed off, but I knew what he hoped. He hoped that time would heal the wounds, that maturity would change Michael's perspective, that somehow his son would learn to accept me as part of the family. "Hope isn't a strategy," I said. "We need to make some decisions about the future of this company, and we need to make them based on results, not relationships." Over the holiday break, Richard and I had long conversations about the company's future. We talked about Michael's strengths and weaknesses, about my contributions and capabilities, about what would be best for the business we had built together. We also talked about our marriage, our partnership, and what we wanted our legacy to be. These conversations were some of the most honest and difficult we had ever had. Richard was forced to confront the reality that his son might never develop the skills or judgment necessary to lead the company effectively. More painfully, he had to acknowledge that Michael's hostility toward me wasn't just a phase that would pass with time. It was a fundamental character trait that would make any future collaboration impossible. "I love Michael," Richard said one evening as we sat by the fireplace in our living room. "He's my son, and I want him to be successful. But love doesn't make him qualified to run this company. At least, not yet. And maybe not ever," I added quietly. Richard looked at me with those tired eyes that had seen too many family conflicts. "Maybe not ever," he agreed. The admission was devastating for Richard, but it was also liberating. For the first time, he could make decisions about the company's future based on objective criteria rather than paternal obligation. And when he looked at the objective criteria, revenue generation, client relationships, operational expertise, strategic vision, the choice was clear. In January 2015, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He announced to the staff that he was promoting me to executive vice president with full operational authority over the company's day-to-day management. He would remain as chairman and CEO, but the actual running of the business would be my responsibility. The announcement was made during our monthly all-hands meeting, and I could see the surprise on some faces and approval on others. Most of the staff had worked closely with me for years and understood my contributions to the company's success. They also understood that my promotion represented stability and continuity, not the disruptive reorganization that Michael's vision would have required. Margaret has been instrumental in our growth and success, Richard told the assembled group. She has the expertise, the client relationships, and the strategic vision to lead Henderson and Chen Associates into the future. I'm confident that under her operational leadership, we'll continue to exceed our clients' expectations and our own goals. Michael's reaction was swift and predictable. He demanded a private meeting with his father, which turned into a shouting match that could be heard throughout the office. When Michael emerged from Richard's office, his face was white with anger. The confrontation in Richard's office was brutal and final. According to Sarah, who was working at her desk outside Richard's door, Michael accused his father of destroying the family legacy and of being manipulated by a gold digger who doesn't understand what this company really means. He threatened to quit, to start his own competing firm, to expose the truth about what's really happening here. Richard's response was calm but devastating. He told Michael that if he wanted to compete with Henderson and Chen Associates, he was welcome to try, but he wouldn't be taking any clients, staff, or proprietary information with him. He also pointed out that Michael had signed a non-compete agreement when he joined the company, which would prevent him from soliciting our clients for 2 years after leaving. "This isn't over," Michael said to me as he passed my desk. "This company belongs to the Henderson family, and I am the Henderson family." "You're part of the Henderson family," I corrected. "But so am I. I married your father, I built this business alongside him, and I've earned my place here. You, on the other hand, need to start earning yours." Michael didn't respond, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. This was war, and he wasn't planning to surrender. Over the next 3 years, I proved that Richard's faith in me was justified. Under my operational leadership, Henderson and Associates expanded from a regional consulting firm to a national presence. We opened offices in New York and Chicago, developed specialized service lines in digital transformation and crisis management, and built a client roster that included Fortune 500 companies. The expansion to New York was particularly challenging because it required establishing credibility in a market that was dominated by large, established consulting firms. I spent months developing relationships with potential clients, speaking at industry events, and demonstrating that our specialized expertise could deliver better results than the one-size-fits-all approach offered by our larger competitors. Our first major New York client was Imperium Financial, a mid-sized investment bank that was struggling with regulatory compliance issues following new federal banking regulations. The project required deep expertise in both financial services and regulatory law, plus the ability to implement changes quickly without disrupting ongoing operations. The Imperium project became a showcase for our ability to deliver specialized expertise with personal attention. While larger firms would have assigned a team of junior consultants supervised by a partner who rarely interacted with the client, I personally managed the relationship and worked directly with Imperium's senior management to develop solutions. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. We not only helped Imperium achieve full regulatory compliance ahead of schedule, but we also identified operational inefficiencies that, when corrected, improved their profit margins by 8%. The success led to referrals to 3 other financial services companies and established our reputation in the competitive New York market. The Chicago expansion followed a similar pattern, focusing on manufacturing and logistics companies that needed help with supply chain optimization and operational efficiency. The Midwest market was more relationship-driven than New York, but it was also more value-conscious, which played to our strengths as a boutique firm that could deliver personalized service at competitive rates. Michael, meanwhile, struggled to find his footing in the new organizational structure. His attempts to circumvent my authority were consistently unsuccessful, partly because the staff respected my leadership and partly because Richard backed my decisions even when they conflicted with his son's preferences. The most telling incident occurred in the summer of 2016 when one of our oldest clients, Peterson Manufacturing, was facing a hostile takeover that threatened thousands of jobs. Michael proposed a conventional consulting approach that would have generated fees but probably wouldn't have saved the company. I developed a comprehensive defense strategy that involved financial restructuring, strategic partnerships, and a media campaign that highlighted the acquiring company's history of job cuts. The Peterson situation was complex because the hostile takeover was being led by Meridian Capital, a private equity firm with a reputation for acquiring manufacturing companies, stripping their assets, and eliminating jobs to maximize short-term profits. Peterson's management team was experienced and capable, but they lacked the specialized knowledge needed to mount an effective defense. Michael's proposed strategy was textbook corporate consulting. Analyze the company's financial position, identify areas for cost reduction, and recommend operational changes that would make Peterson less attractive to acquirers. It was a defensive approach that might have delayed the takeover but wouldn't have prevented it. My strategy was more aggressive and comprehensive. I proposed that Peterson should take the offensive by demonstrating their value to shareholders, employees, and the community. This involved 3 coordinated elements: financial restructuring to improve the balance sheet, strategic partnerships to strengthen their market position, and a public relations campaign to highlight the contrast between Peterson's commitment to their workforce and Meridian's track record of job destruction. The financial restructuring involved renegotiating debt terms, divesting non-core assets, and implementing efficiency improvements that would increase cash flow without reducing employment. The strategic partnerships included long-term supply agreements with key customers and joint ventures with technology companies that would enhance Peterson's capabilities. The public relations campaign was the most innovative element. Working with a communications firm that specialized in corporate crisis management, we developed a narrative that positioned Peterson as a responsible employer fighting to protect American jobs against a predatory financial firm that cared only about profit. "Your approach is too risky," Michael argued during the strategy meeting. "We should stick to what we know, provide standard consulting services, and let them handle the politics." "Standard consulting services won't save Peterson Manufacturing," I replied. "They need innovative solutions, and they need them fast. If we can't deliver that, they'll find someone who can." Richard listened to both presentations and made his choice. "We go with Margaret's plan. Peterson has been with us for 8 years, and they deserve our best effort, not our safest option." My strategy worked. Peterson Manufacturing not only survived the takeover attempt, but emerged stronger, with a restructured debt profile and new strategic partnerships that positioned them for growth. The media campaign generated national attention, with several news outlets covering the story as an example of how American companies could fight back against predatory capitalism. The success generated significant positive publicity for Henderson and Associates and led to 3 new major client contracts from companies that were impressed by our willingness to go beyond traditional consulting to deliver real solutions. More importantly, it demonstrated that my approach to client service was fundamentally different from the standard consulting model. We weren't just advisors, we were partners committed to our clients' success. Michael's response to this success was telling. Instead of congratulating me or acknowledging the effectiveness of my approach, he complained to Richard that I was grandstanding and taking unnecessary risks with the company's reputation. "She got results," Richard replied simply. "In this business, results are what matter." But I could see that the constant conflict between his son and his wife was wearing on Richard. He was in his mid-60s by then, and the stress of managing both a growing business and a family feud was taking its toll. He started talking more frequently about retirement, about stepping back and letting the next generation take over. The problem was that Richard and I had very different ideas about what that next generation looked like. In early 2018, Richard was diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. The doctors caught it quickly, and the prognosis was excellent, but the diagnosis forced all of us to confront questions about mortality and legacy that we had been avoiding. "I need to get my affairs in order," Richard told me after his first oncology appointment. "The business, the estate planning, everything. I don't want to leave loose ends." The cancer diagnosis was a wake-up call that changed Richard's perspective on time and priorities. He had always been the type of person who assumed he would have years to resolve family conflicts and plan for succession. But suddenly the future felt less certain and more urgent. Over the next several months, as Richard underwent treatment, we worked with attorneys and financial advisors to structure his estate and plan for various scenarios regarding the company's future. Richard wanted to ensure that I would be financially secure regardless of what happened, but he also wanted to leave something meaningful for Michael. The solution we developed was complex but fair. Richard would leave his personal assets, including our home and his retirement accounts, to me as his spouse. The company would be restructured as a corporation with shareholder agreements that reflected each person's contribution to its success. I would receive 60% ownership based on my role in building the business. Michael would receive 30% as Richard's son and heir, and the remaining 10% would be held in trust for any future family members or key employees. Most importantly, the shareholder agreement included specific performance metrics that would determine operational control. Whoever could demonstrate the most effective leadership, as measured by revenue growth, client satisfaction, and staff retention, would serve as CEO. It was a meritocracy with family preferences, but ultimately merit would prevail. The performance metrics were carefully designed to prevent gaming and ensure that leadership decisions would be based on objective results rather than politics or favoritism. Revenue growth would be measured over 3-year periods to avoid short-term manipulation. Client satisfaction would be assessed through independent surveys and retention rates. Staff retention would be measured through turnover statistics and employee satisfaction surveys. When Richard explained the new structure to Michael, the reaction was explosive. Michael accused his father of betraying the family legacy and me of manipulating a sick man. He threatened to contest the arrangement, to take legal action, to destroy the company rather than let me control it. "You're not thinking clearly, Dad," Michael said, during what would turn out to be their final argument about the business. "The cancer, the medications, they're affecting your judgment. Margaret has poisoned your mind against your own son." Richard's response was quiet but firm. "My mind is perfectly clear, Michael. And what I see clearly is that Margaret has spent the last 15 years building this company while you've spent that same time feeling entitled to it. Entitlement doesn't create success. Work creates success." The conversation escalated from there, with Michael making increasingly desperate and hurtful accusations. He claimed that I had isolated Richard from his family, that I had manipulated the business structure to steal his inheritance, that I had never loved Richard but only wanted his money and status. Richard listened to these accusations with growing anger and disappointment. Finally, he stood up from his desk and walked to the door of his office. "Get out," he told Michael, his voice shaking with emotion. "Get out of this office, get out of this company, and don't come back until you're ready to earn your place here instead of demanding it." Michael stormed out of the office that day and didn't speak to Richard for 2 weeks. When he finally returned, it was with a lawyer and a demand that Richard undergo a mental competency evaluation before making any major decisions about the business. That was the moment when Richard's patience finally ran out. The suggestion that his cancer diagnosis had somehow compromised his mental capacity was deeply insulting and demonstrated just how far Michael was willing to go to get what he believed he deserved. "Get out," Richard told Michael again, but this time his voice was cold and final. "Get out of this office, get out of this company, and don't come back until you're ready to earn your place here instead of demanding it." Michael left, and this time he didn't return. He sent his resignation letter by email 2 days later, along with a threat to pursue all legal options to protect the Henderson family interests. Richard's cancer treatment was successful, but the emotional toll of the conflict with Michael accelerated his desire to retire. By the end of 2018, he had stepped down as CEO, and I had taken full operational control of Henderson and Associates. Richard remained as chairman of the board, but the day-to-day leadership of the company was entirely mine. "I should be sad," Richard told me one evening as we reviewed the quarterly reports in our home office. "I built this company from nothing, and now I'm walking away from it. But honestly, I'm proud. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, and I'm proud that it's in such capable hands. Our hands, I corrected. We built this together. Richard smiled and squeezed my hand. Yes, we did. And Michael will figure that out someday, I hope. But Michael didn't figure it out. Instead, he spent the next 2 years building a case for what he called elder abuse and undue influence. He hired investigators to scrutinize our marriage, our business practices, and our financial arrangements. He contacted former employees and distant relatives looking for anyone who would support his claim that I had manipulated Richard into disinheriting his rightful heir. The investigation went nowhere because there was nothing to find. Every decision Richard had made was documented, witnessed, and legally sound. Our marriage was solid, our business practices were ethical, and the company's success under my leadership was undeniable. By 2020, Henderson and Associates had tripled in revenue since I had taken over as CEO, and we had earned industry recognition for both our client services and our workplace culture. Michael's legal challenges were dismissed, his appeals were rejected, and eventually even his lawyers advised him to accept the reality of the situation. He had bet everything on his ability to prove that he was the victim of a conspiracy, and he had lost. The private investigators that Michael hired actually ended up generating positive publicity for our company when they couldn't find any evidence of wrongdoing. Several industry publications covered the story of how a consulting firm had successfully navigated a hostile succession challenge while continuing to grow and serve clients effectively. One investigative report, which I obtained through our attorneys, included interviews with dozens of current and former employees, clients, and business partners. The overwhelming consensus was that my leadership had transformed Henderson and Associates from a small, personality-driven consulting practice into a professional services firm with national reach and specialized expertise. The report also included financial analysis that demonstrated the company's growth trajectory under my management. Revenue had increased by 240% since I became CEO. Profit margins had improved by 15%, and client retention rates were above 90%. Perhaps most telling, employee satisfaction scores were higher than they had ever been under Richard's leadership, despite the larger size and more complex structure of the organization. The final blow came in March 2021, when Richard suffered a massive heart attack at the age of 67. Despite all the conflicts with Michael, Richard's last words to me were about reconciliation. "Call Michael," he whispered as the paramedics worked on him. "Tell him I love him. Tell him there's room for him if he wants it." I did call Michael. I told him his father was in the hospital, that it was serious, that he should come. Michael arrived just as Richard was being taken into surgery, and for a brief moment, seeing his son's anguished face, I thought that maybe grief would accomplish what years of argument couldn't. But Richard didn't survive the surgery, and at the funeral, Michael made it clear that his father's death had not changed his perspective about me or about the company. The funeral was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Boston, and it was packed with clients, employees, industry colleagues, and family friends who had known Richard for decades. The service was beautiful and moving, with eulogies that celebrated Richard's kindness, his integrity, and his commitment to both his family and his work. I spoke about Richard's vision for building a company that would make a real difference in clients' lives, his dedication to treating employees with respect and fairness, and his belief that business success should be measured not just in financial terms, but in terms of positive impact on communities and individuals. Michael also spoke, delivering a eulogy that focused on Richard's role as a father and his commitment to family values and generational legacy. The speech was appropriate for the setting, but I could hear the underlying message about blood relationships and inherited responsibility. After the service, as we gathered at the cemetery for the burial, Michael approached me during a quiet moment when most of the other mourners were talking among themselves. "This isn't over," he told me, his voice low enough that others couldn't hear. "I don't care what papers you have or what lawyers you've hired. This company should be mine, and I'm going to find a way to get it back." I looked at this 32-year-old man who had inherited his father's eyes, but none of his wisdom, who had spent 16 years fighting me instead of learning from me, who even in his grief could only think about what he believed he was owed. "Michael," I said quietly, "your father left you a 30% stake in a successful company. If you wanted to be part of it, if you wanted to work with me instead of against me, there would be a place for you. But if you want to keep fighting, you're going to lose. Because I'm not just passing through anymore. This is my company now. This is my legacy." Michael stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculations running behind his eyes. For just a second, I thought he might choose differently. But then his face hardened into that familiar expression of entitled anger. "We'll see," he said, and walked away. That was 18 months ago. Since then, Michael has launched 2 more legal challenges, both of which have been dismissed. He has attempted to contact our clients directly, suggesting that the company is unstable under non-family leadership. He has posted negative reviews online and started rumors about financial irregularities that don't exist. The legal challenges were increasingly desperate and poorly conceived. The first claimed that Richard's estate planning documents were invalid because he lacked mental capacity when they were signed. This argument failed because we had extensive medical documentation showing that Richard was lucid and competent throughout his cancer treatment and recovery. The second challenge claimed that I had committed fraud by misrepresenting my contributions to the company's success. This argument required Michael to prove that the revenue, client relationships, and operational improvements that were documented in our business records were somehow fabricated or exaggerated. When his attorneys reviewed the evidence, they advised him to drop the case rather than face sanctions for frivolous litigation. The attempts to undermine client relationships were more concerning because they could have damaged our reputation even if they didn't succeed legally. Michael contacted several major clients, suggesting that they should be concerned about continuity of service and leadership stability following Richard's death. Fortunately, our client relationships were strong enough to withstand this kind of attack. Most clients simply forwarded Michael's communications to me, and several expressed outrage that he would try to exploit his father's death to undermine the company. Robert Thornton from Thornton Industries was particularly blunt in his response. "Your stepson contacted me yesterday with some ridiculous story about leadership instability," Robert told me during a phone call. "I told him that in all my years of working with Henderson and Chen Associates, you've been the most competent and reliable consultant we've ever worked with. If he thinks he can scare away your clients with amateur hour tactics, he's badly mistaken. None of it has worked. Henderson and Associates continues to thrive under my leadership, and our clients value the stability and expertise that I provide. The staff respects me not because I inherited my position, but because I earned it through years of hard work and results. In fact, the attempts to undermine the company have backfired in several ways. The industry attention generated by Michael's legal challenges has actually increased our visibility and credibility. Several potential clients have approached us specifically because they were impressed by how we handled the succession crisis while continuing to deliver exceptional service. We've also been able to recruit several talented consultants who were attracted by our reputation for professionalism and stability. 2 senior partners from larger firms have joined us in the past year, bringing their own client relationships and specialized expertise that have expanded our capabilities in new directions. This morning, as I sat in my office reviewing the plans for our new West Coast expansion, I received an email that made me smile. It was from Robert Thornton, the client who had been present during Michael's subtle challenge to my authority at that dinner party 10 years ago. "Margaret," the email read, "I wanted to congratulate you on the company's continued success and to let you know that Thornton Industries will be increasing our consulting contract by 40% next year. Your leadership has been exactly what we need during these challenging times. Richard would be proud of what you've accomplished." Yes, Richard would be proud. And he would be proud not just of the business success, but of the fact that I never gave up, never backed down, and never accepted Michael's definition of where I belonged in this family. The West Coast expansion that Robert mentioned represents the culmination of everything I've worked toward over the past 15 years. We're opening an office in San Francisco that will focus on technology consulting, an area where our analytical approach and personalized service model should be particularly effective. The San Francisco office will be staffed by consultants who have experience with both traditional business operations and emerging technologies. This will allow us to help established companies navigate digital transformation while also providing strategic guidance to technology startups that need help scaling their operations. The expansion also represents a personal milestone for me. When I started working with Richard in 2008, Henderson and Associates was a small regional firm with 12 employees and annual revenue of less than $2 million. Today, we're a national consulting practice with offices in 4 cities, 85 employees, and annual revenue approaching $30 million. More importantly, we've maintained the values that Richard instilled in the company from the beginning: integrity, excellence, and genuine commitment to client success. The growth hasn't come at the expense of quality or personal relationships. It's come because we've been able to scale those values across a larger organization. As I finished my morning coffee and prepared for a full day of meetings with potential new clients, I reflected on Michael's favorite phrase, "You're just passing through." He was wrong about almost everything, but he was especially wrong about that. I'm not passing through. I've arrived. This is my place. This is my company, and this is my legacy. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for recognition that never comes. Some people accept being diminished by those who claim to know their worth better than they do. But some of us choose to prove our value through our actions, to build our own recognition through our achievements, and to write our own definitions of where we belong. Michael thought he could wait me out, thought that eventually his birthright would triumph over my contributions. He thought wrong. In the business world, just like in life, the people who show up, do the work, and deliver results are the ones who ultimately prevail. Entitlement is not a strategy, and blood relation is not a guarantee of success. The nameplate on my office door reads, Margaret Chen, CEO and President. There's no asterisk, no qualifier, no indication that my authority is temporary or conditional. I put in the work, I earned the position, and now I'm exactly where I belong. Wondering where you're watching this story unfold from? I'd love to know what city and country you're calling home while listening to this tale of persistence and justice. Drop a comment below and let me know. Looking back, I realized that Michael's hostility actually made me stronger and more determined than I might have been otherwise. If he had accepted me from the beginning, I might have been content to play a supporting role in Richard's business. But his constant challenges forced me to prove myself repeatedly, to document my contributions meticulously, and to build capabilities that went far beyond what was strictly necessary. In a strange way, Michael's attempts to exclude me from the Henderson family legacy resulted in me becoming more central to that legacy than anyone could have imagined. Richard founded the company, but I transformed it into something much larger and more successful than he had ever envisioned. The Henderson name is still on the door, but the Chen principles and practices are what drive our success. If you've made it this far in the story, I hope you've enjoyed this journey from exclusion to empowerment. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who should have recognized it from the beginning? I'd love to hear your stories. Because at the end of the day, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's succeeding so completely that your critics have no choice but to acknowledge that they were wrong about you from the very beginning. And trust me, that acknowledgement tastes even better than the morning coffee in your own corner office. The irony is that Michael could have been part of this success story if he had chosen collaboration over confrontation. There was always room for him in the company's future, but only if he was willing to earn his place rather than simply inherit it. His insistence on birthright over merit ultimately cost him everything he thought he was protecting. Today, as I look toward the future of Henderson and Chen Associates, I see unlimited potential for growth and impact. We've built something that will outlast any individual, something that creates value for clients, opportunities for employees, and positive change in the communities where we work. That's a legacy worth fighting for, and it's a legacy that belongs to everyone who helped build it, regardless of their last name or their DNA. Some people are born into their positions, others earn them through dedication, competence, and an unwillingness to accept limitations that others try to impose. I've never been prouder to be in the second category, and I've never been more certain that merit, not birthright, is the foundation of lasting success.